I want you to watch. But before that, I want to tell you a story that I've told here before. When I was in Bible school, my really, really good friend, you guys all know him, Chris Kramer, pastors up in Michigan. He was living in a dormitory for a while, and then, I had him on an apartment and everything, and I said, Chris, how can you stand living in a dorm? And he said, I really can't. So he found a place to live, and his place he got to live was free, actually. All he had to do was drive a hearse and go pick up dead bodies. That's all he had to do. And he lived above the funeral home. And now I know, Mary Ann works at a funeral home and she's there all day long, and I do spend a lot of time over there. But back when I was young, going to the funeral home was kind of like, it just, was unsettling, kind of freaked me out a little bit, and then he would have to go at night and drive the hearse, and someone died, he would go pick up the body and bring it back and so forth. And so we thought it'd be fun if we had some friends over one time. He lived above it, and it was in the night, and we took him downstairs into the, I don't know what you call it, embalming room, or is that what it is? I don't know. It's all stainless steel everywhere, and I forget what the floors. The floors were I don't know what they were made of, but they were slick. They were maybe something easy to clean, I guess. That's what it was. So we would tell people that they had to take off their shoes when they came down, and they were wearing their socks. And so we would lay somebody on one of those tables with a sheet over them. We would be down there, and we get down there, and well, I don't have to explain it anymore, but they would bust out of that sheet, and people would scream and run, and they're trying to run in their socks, and they can't run, they're falling on the ground, and we had so much fun doing that. I think it was done to me one time too. I'm not exactly sure. Well, the reason is why, because dead people don't come back to life. And so that's kind of what our story is about today. And all through this story, really all through the Gospel of John, there's a looming question that's constantly asked. And it's this question. The name of the title of our message today: Do you believe? Do you believe? Let's watch this quick short video.
Charles Blondin, he was one of the greatest tightrope walkers in the history of the world. And one of his greatest feats was walking the Niagara Falls on a tightrope, 11,000 feet long, 160 feet above the water. And this he accomplished a number of times, and always with different theatric variations. Blindfolded, in a sack, pushing a wheelbarrow, on stilts, carrying a man on his back, and sitting down one time midway while he made and ate an omelet. And one day after he had pushed a wheelbarrow across the Niagara Falls and come back on that tightrope, he asked a question. How many of you believe that I could put a person in this wheelbarrow and push him across the tightrope? And everybody cheered and yelled and screamed, and everybody believed. And then he asked for a volunteer. And the crowd grew very, very quiet.
Pause it right there.
Until one man.
I don't know about you, but I wouldn't get in that wheelbarrow for anything. The question is, it's easy to believe for someone else, isn't it, right? Do you believe that somebody could get in the wheelbarrow and I push them across? Yeah, I believe somebody could do that. Well, you do it. No, I don't believe I can. And so that's this question that we find in the Gospel of John, just over and over again, kind of, do you believe? This word, believe, is in there. Let me read you what C.S. Lewis wrote in his A Grief Observed. This is after his wife passed away, C.S. Lewis. He said, you never really know if you believe anything until its truth or falsehood becomes a matter of life and death. It's easy to say you believe a rope is strong as long as it's merely used to tie a box. But suppose you had to hang by that rope over a precipice. Wouldn't you then discover how much you really trusted it? He wrote this all after his wife's death. When I was younger, I used to do a lot of rock climbing, and we used to do rappelling and climbing, and only a couple times in my life did I do what's called lead climbing. Lead climbing is, well, first off, there's just bouldering where you have no rope or anything, which is pretty simple. If you fall, you're not very high off the ground. Then you have what's called top roping, where a rope goes from you up to a protection source and down to somebody who's going to protect you and belay you. And so as you climb, they pull the rope through their figure eight descender, or their belay plate, and they pull it through there. And then if you fall, all they have to do with two fingers, they could pull it to their hip, and it locks in there, and you just kind of hang there. But there's something called lead climbing, and I got to do it a couple times. Lead climbing is where you're both on the ground, and you tie in, and you start climbing the rock, and then you take protection. We use these things called friends. You pull them back like this. There's the cams that went like this, and you put them in a crack, and they separate like that. You put those in there, and there's different types of protection. There are pitons, which they don't allow anymore. That's pounding something into the rock, and there are chocks and stoppers and all these different sorts of things. But the idea is when you're climbing, then you'll put the piece of protection in the rock, pull your rope up and clip it in. So now the rope comes from your partner up through the carabiner onto the protection and down to you. But the problem is that when you pass that piece of protection, now if you're 2 feet above it, now you can fall to 2 feet to your protection, 2 more feet, 4 feet. And then this rope is not static, it's dynamic, so it stretches. So you may fall, a 4 feet fall, maybe 6 to 8 feet. Doesn't sound like much, but when you're up on a rock 40 feet and you're falling, it is scary. And you're all being supported by a rope the size of your little finger. So you really, really have to know, you have to trust not just your rope, but you have to trust that you put the protection in the rock secure enough. Because if you fall and that piece of protection comes out of the rock, now you fall further down to your next one. And then you have that jerk at the end. And I've had a few of those, and they are really, really scary. And so you don't really know how much you believe, or if you really believe, until it's put to the test. You know, there's a book in the Bible written by the brother of Jesus, and it has been for centuries a debated book whether it should be in. Like, there are other books that they didn't put in, like the Gospel of Thomas didn't get included into the canon. And James was a book that was also, well, they were very skeptical of it for a long time. Some people didn't think it should be in, some people did. So this is one of the things that James said. It's a troubling thing for anybody, I would think. And James says this. James tells us to consider it pure joy. Now just pause that for a minute. Somebody starts out, consider it pure joy. What is pure joy? Just in your own mind. Like, what do you think that is? How do you feel if you're experiencing pure joy? What's that like? And what might cause you to experience pure joy? Well, he says, consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds. That's the last thing. Joy is the last thing I'm thinking of when I experience a trial. You? It's the last thing that's coming to my mind. I'm not thinking of joy at all. But he says, consider it not just joy, but pure joy when you face trials of many kinds. Well, if he paused there and you were in front of him, what might your question be? My question would be, why in the world is that? Why should I consider a trial pure joy? Well, he says, because you know the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature. How many want to be mature? I want to be mature. I mean, what I'm talking about in our faith now, a mature faith, not like James says, one who is double-minded, who is tossed back and forth. Can you imagine like the waves of an ocean he talks about, just being tossed around? Imagine a cork on those waves just going all over the place. Anybody ever been on the ocean and you're catching a ball with somebody and the ball's there and the waves are coming, it's going all over the place. Tide's taking it out, waves are bringing it in. That's the picture he's giving. You don't want to be that kind of person. Who that's kind of faith they have that's just kind of wishy-washy and bouncing all around. And one time you think you believe, another time you don't, and you're all over the place. He said, what causes you to have a mature faith? What causes that sort of thing are trials and difficulties in your life. I would talk to Michelle about, Brent and Brock sometimes, and about, some of the things they were maybe doing or whatever, and we would both be concerned, and even though she was expressing concern, I would be too, but I would try to be a voice of reason, right? Even though I was still concerned, I would say, well, what's the worst thing that could happen if something like that happened? And she would say, well, this. I said, okay, then what? Well, this. Do you follow what I'm saying? And you keep pushing out, and then you finally realize it's during those times that you really do grow. Isn't it true? Now, not that we want those for ourselves or our kids, trials and tribulations, but those are the times in our life that we grow the most, that we really learn about our faith. It's hard. It's hard to know if you really believe when you're living in America. It's really hard to know if you really believe. Difficult, because our faith isn't really put to the test very much. So he says, perseverance must finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. So if we were to take this, you didn't know this verse, and I would say to you, do you want to be mature? Yeah, I want to be mature. Do you want to be complete? Absolutely, I want to be complete. Do you want to be not lacking anything in your life? Exactly, that's what I want. Okay, then, consider it pure joy when you face trials of many kinds, because it's that, the testing of your faith, that will produce what I just said. Well, I'm not sure about that. I don't know if I want that. And so it's a difficult place to be. I have a pastor friend right now who's experiencing very, very real anxiety and depression. And I talk to him maybe once a week, and I was telling him, I said, I hate to say it like this, but this is exactly what you have helped people with your entire ministry. Things that you have said to them, how you've helped them. Now it's your turn. Now it's your turn to live it and internalize it and to really know, right? It's easy to say, I believe these things are true for you, right? I believe somebody could get in that wheelbarrow. Now it's time to get in the wheelbarrow and know, what do I believe? John uses the word believe 98 times in his gospel. That's actually 3 times more than the word believed is used in the other 3 gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, over 3 times as much. And so John is very specific in why he's writing his gospel. In John 20:31, he says this, that you may believe. That's why I'm writing. That's why he's writing this. When you pick up the Gospel of John, know that his intent for you is this, that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing, this is the best part, and that, so it's not just to believe that, and that by believing you may have life in his name, that you may have life. And if you know your Bible, if you know when the Bible talks about life, Jesus said this, I have come that you may have life in its most abundant form. And it comes from believing that he's the Messiah, the Anointed One, the Christ, the Son of God, to have life in his name. So it brings us to this story that we're going to be looking at today, and it's all in your notes. And I'm not going to read through it, every single verse, but we're going to look through it, and then at the end, I'll make some comments through it, like I have been doing. At the end, I'll give you a few points that I think may be helpful for us today. Starts out like this in verse 11. Now a man named Lazarus was sick. Let's just pause there for a minute. Because when we think of sick, we're not talking about, this sickness isn't a cold. This sickness is, laying in bed, body aching all over, fever, sweating, vomiting, whatever. This is near death sickness. I remember when my older brother passed away, I remember I was in the hospital with him the last couple days, and it was just terrible to be. It was great to be with my brother, but to watch him struggle for his breath and know that he was dying of cancer, there was nothing else they could do, and knowing that the end was near. The feeling was, it's hard to describe. Many of you have experienced that already too. I know that. It's a hard thing to describe to somebody who hasn't been through that. And so when it says, now a man named Lazarus was sick, this is the kind of sickness that we're talking about. It said that he was from Bethany, the village of his sisters, Mary and Martha. There's a note that says that this Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. So he's tying it to another story that was well known. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, Lord, the one you love is sick. And that's it. That's all they said. They didn't tell Jesus even what they wanted to do. They may have had expectations, but they didn't say, he's sick, can you get here and you could heal him or do something about this, or is that what it was? Or was it the one you love is sick. Don't you want to see him before he dies? Right? How many times have you heard stories about that loved ones were in another state and said, you need to hurry up and get here. Isn't that right? You need to hurry up and get here because there's not much time. Maybe that's what they meant. Maybe I don't know. There's not much time, Jesus, if you come, say your goodbyes to the one that you love. He said this, when he heard this, Jesus said, this sickness will not end in death. Did he say Lazarus wouldn't die? He didn't say Lazarus wouldn't die. He said this sickness, this particular sickness, wouldn't end in death. Wouldn't end in death. He said this, no, it's for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it. Now, Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, when he heard he was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. So he heard one day, this is important, he heard one day, stayed 2 more days, and had a travel day. How many days is that? He heard one day, stayed 2 more days, had a travel day. How many days is that? 4 days. Okay, so just so you get that. That's important for us to remember that. So when he heard Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. And then he said to his disciples, let's go back to Judah. So let's go to Jerusalem. Now, if you know what's happened previously, Jerusalem is a bad place for Jesus to be. Jesus, they're wanting to kill Jesus. And the disciples don't want Jesus to go back. Probably, more importantly, they don't want to go back. Wouldn't you think? Right? They're his followers. Jesus is trying to be killed. I think they're looking out for their own self. Don't think we should go back. So when he heard Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. And then he said to his disciples, let's go back to Judea. But Rabbi, they said, a short while ago the Jews tried to stone you, and yet you're going back? And if you know, in chapters 5, 7, 8, 9 or 10 or whatever, you read these stories of where they tried to kill Jesus. At least they tried to take him, at least arrest him or take him or stone him or do something. So Jesus answered, he said this, are there not 12 hours of daylight? Anyone who walks in daytime will not stumble, for they see by the world's light. It is when a person walks at night that they stumble, for they have no light. You know what this means? Because I sure don't. I have no idea what it means. I don't think the disciples knew what it means. Like, I honestly have I could make some stabs at it, but it's not sound even guesses. I have no idea. So if you know, talk to me afterwards and let me know. Let's just move on from that. I really have no idea. Said after he had said this, he went to tell them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I am going there to wake him up. His disciples replied, Lord, if he sleeps, he will get better. It said Jesus had been speaking about death, but disciples thought he meant sleep. So then Jesus told them plainly, Lazarus is dead, and for your sake, I'm glad I wasn't there. Why? So that you may believe. And there it is again. And there it is, so that you may believe. Can I maybe change that a minute? He wrote this so that we may believe. Let me ask you a question. What is it that God wants you to believe about him today? You personally, your own life. What is it that he wants you to believe about himself? What area of your life do you have a difficulty? what area of your life is troubled? Do you believe enough in that area of your life? So true belief leads to greater trust. Those two words kind of go together, don't they? Belief and trust. Now, let me just talk about, just real quick here, I think the big idea, at least for me, now, here's the thing. There's more to these stories than just what I'm bringing to you. I hope you know that. I hope you know that you can read these stories for yourself. And depending on where you are in your life, you can draw out different applications from it. You can draw out different principles from it. This is just where I'm at today in my life that I'm bringing to you. And so for me, I think, at least where I am, one of the hardest things, and this is the first thing you know, I think this is, for me, it's the big idea in this story. The big idea for me is this, is that the hardest thing to trust about God, for me, is his timing. To trust his timing. So the sisters say this, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. That's a timing issue, isn't it? If you had been here, in other words, if you had been here on time, if you had been here, we know maybe that somehow that our brother would not have died. Have you ever been disappointed by Jesus? Have you ever needed an answer to a prayer and it was a timing issue and the time just ran out and you didn't get what you wanted at the right time and you were disappointed? I think Mary and Martha were. Now, maybe you're embarrassed to say you were disappointed in Jesus, but I'm not. I've been disappointed a lot in God. Even though I know the things that I know, when push comes to shove, I've been disappointed in God that he didn't do what I wanted when I wanted him to do it. And I was disappointed. As if that's his job. That's his job to do my bidding when I want it. The Messiah had not met their expectations. Anybody? Didn't meet your expectations. Listen, it's bad enough putting expectations on people around you, and now we put expectations on God. And then, so what do you do then? How do you respond when the bottom falls out? Well, I want to talk about three things here. When we struggle with God's timing, I think there are three things that I want us to see, because if you haven't yet struggled with God's timing, you will struggle with his timing. You will. And I want to bring out three things from this story that I think we can count on when we're struggling with God's timing. The first one is this, is that I can trust him and you could trust him personally. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. And then Martha answered, just listen to this dialogue back and forth. I know he will rise again in the resurrection in the last day. I know I'll see him again. So right before service, when Tony was going to be reading that passage out of Revelation, he was asking me, he said, Jeff, whose voice is this? It kind of jumps back and forth of people and so forth. And Jesus is talking one time in his vision, and it's Jesus talking. One time it's him talking. He's seeing this back and forth. But the whole point of this whole part in Revelation is that Jesus is the resurrection. He is the resurrection. And I told you a couple weeks ago, a friend of mine asked me about, maybe this was last week, about what's the minimum thing that you have to kind of believe in order to have life in his name, right? And I talked last week about this idea of salvation, what it is, this kind of this process and so forth, and born again. Do you have to be born again? Yes, you have to be born again. The Bible clearly says, but what does that mean? What does that look like? And really what it comes down to is, it comes down to this. It comes down to the answer to John's question all throughout his gospel. Do you believe? Do you believe? And I think if I ask everybody in here, or anybody who's ever gone to church, do you believe? Their answer would absolutely be a resounding, yes, I believe. But you never know how much you believe or what you believe until it's done what? Like it says in James, until it's put to the test, until it's tried, until you have no other choice but to depend on and trust in that belief. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. She said, I know he's going to live again. I know I'll see him again. I know that. I know there's going to be a time when there's going to be a resurrection. There's going to be a new heaven and a new earth. All things are going to be made new, right? And Jesus said, I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live. Now, this is a twofold kind of thing here, isn't it? Right? Yes, he's referring to what he's going to do in a minute here with Lazarus, but he's talking about something so much deeper, isn't he? He's talking about so much more on a spiritual level. He who believes in me will live. I mean, really have life. Real life. Abundant life, like Jesus says. That kind of life. Those who believe in me will live even though they die. And whoever lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? Consider that question for a minute. Jesus is 4 days late. Why do you think that's an interesting detail? I'll tell you something you may not know. It was believed in first century that for 3 days the Spirit lingered around the body. Lingered around the body. Just in case something would happen and it would come back. And so if that happened, right, within 3 days, they would say, well, the Spirit's been here, decided it wasn't ready to go off somewhere, so it came back into the body. You follow me? This was 4 days. There was no doubt that Lazarus was dead. Martha has had plenty of time to give up on Jesus, it's true. Now let's think about this for a minute. Jesus is right before her. And Jesus has the audacity to pull the rank on death itself. Death itself. Like, if I was there and I could say, yeah, you're the Messiah. Yeah, you're the Son of God. I could see, what emotion did she answer that question? She said, yes, Lord. She said to him, I believe. Is that what she said? Or did she go, yeah, I believe. I believe you're the Christ. I believe you're the Son of God. Like, I believe that. Like, I've been told, I think that. You're the one who has come into the world, right? I mean, that's what I believe. I don't think it was with triumph or joy or exhilaration that she answered that question. I hear a meek, hesitant voice. And why is that? Well, think of the emotion of her brother dying. Her brother's gone. I mean, she's sad, and Jesus is there, and yeah, she believes, but to what degree? And Jesus is talking about these things that no one's ever seen before. If someone said that to you, you'd be like, can you imagine that, Marianne? If somebody came into the funeral home in there and said, well, listen, I know he's been dead for 4 days, but this isn't the end. You'd be going, come on, man. You know what I mean? Like, I've seen a lot of dead people, right, Marianne? You've seen a lot of dead people, haven't you? A lot of dead people. None of them come back. And Martha's experiencing this. I think she believed, right? She believed that he was the Messiah. She believed that. She believed he was the Son of God. She believed he's the one that came. But she wasn't ready to say he could raise the dead. She wasn't ready for that. And I think that's our problem sometimes. We believe, but we're not ready to admit that God can take care of our problems. It's not ready to admit that. Yeah, maybe for someone else, I believe that Jesus is the Son of God. I believe that. But to handle my problem, I just don't think I have enough. But she had enough faith to say those three things. She had enough faith. She had a mustard seed of faith to say, you're the anointed one. There have been many anointed ones, but I think, you're the anointed one. You're the Son of God. You're the one that's come into the world. And that faith somehow must have been enough for Jesus. Must have been enough for him. Number two is this. Number two is, when I struggle on his timing, I can trust his heart. This is extremely important. Said this is, I had a nice long conversation with a friend of mine over this, and I told him today that I would maybe try to answer his question that I avoided answering when I talked to him, Steve, and I texted everything. I wanted him to think through it on his own rather than ask me what the answer is, because this is just my take. But it's this, that when I struggle with this time, I can trust this. I can trust his heart. I can trust his heart. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, now Steve's translation said he was angry, which is fine. A translation that I chose, that he was deeply moved. Now, let me just pause here for a minute. The word that's used there is a word that's used to describe, how many of you have been experienced around horses at all? When you're around horses get, they can get hot. They can get excited, they can get kind of agitated, and they get antsy, and they're kind of like, it's like they're ready to just explode, and they're stomping and they're snorting out of their nose, right? They're all just real anxious. And that's actually the word that's used here. It's that sense, and this is the way kind of Jesus. So is anger, is that the right thing? Maybe. He was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. So the question was, why is that? What so deeply moved him and troubled him? Because then he said this, where have you laid him? He asked. Come and see, Lord, they replied. And then Jesus wept. So you have this intense emotion, then you have Jesus weeping. Then the Jews said, see how he loved him. So that deeply moved, it's kind of sternly or feel strong about something. So he was troubled and disturbed. Now these emotions are real. I've been to enough funerals to see all kinds of emotions at funerals. Seen people who suppress any emotion. Huh, Marianne? You've seen that. You know that something's in there just brewing, but they're suppressing it. You see other people, Tony, you'll know, funerals in Africa, the emotion is just raw and out there, isn't it, right? Just wailing. It's actually eerie feeling. Through the night you hear, especially if a mama has lost a child, the wailing through the night, the excruciating pain, the agony of that loss. These emotions are real. Jesus felt them because of death and the grave, and it's okay for us to feel them too. Now let me just pause here for a minute and talk about trying to understand passages of Scripture that seem difficult. Let's suppose that Pete's known me for 40 plus years, 50 years maybe, close to it. Pete knows me as well as just about anybody knows me. And so he knows how I am. So if I behave sometime out of character that he knows me, a good friend will say, well, something's up with Jeff, because that's not him. You follow me? And so you give somebody the benefit of the doubt and you go, well, something else is going on, because listen, I know Jeff to be this way. Not just over weeks, but over a period of decades, I know him to be this way. And this is out of character. Something's going on. So you give him a pass. And so one of the ways that we interpret and understand Scripture is to understand, so what is Jesus like? Not in this instant. What is he like? What has he shown himself to be? He's shown himself to be loving, compassionate, and kind, and merciful, and long-suffering. Does he show anger? He certainly does. When he shows anger, is things like that are against very important things, like in the temple. The temple is supposed to be a place of prayer, of God's house, sort of in that first century. And there are people in there changing money. They're in there kind of gambling almost. And Jesus, that just upset him. Or if somebody were to do something wrong to children, right? Boy, that's now you're pushing them over the edge. Isn't that right? Right? But here, is he angry because they don't believe? I don't think so. He's faced it his entire ministry. Matter of fact, everything was about this. His whole book is about that, so you may believe. And Jesus knows that. He's even saying, listen, the reason why is so you may believe. So is he angry because they doubting him, they don't believe? I don't think so. You know what I think it is? I think it's this. I think the emotion of he's so bothered and troubled by the power that, now Tony read this for us here today. He's gonna we'll talk about it here in a minute. The power that death and the grave have over us. I think that bothers him and that angers him. Because it wasn't meant to be so, and one day it's not going to be so. But at this point, it still is. Isn't that right? And I think that bothers him. I think that angers him. Because he doesn't want to. Do you want to see that for your loved ones? Absolutely not. Do you want to see the suffering that people go through when they lose a loved one? Absolutely not. And I think that bothers him, and I think that angers him. So this is a type of exegesis to do, is to say, if I have something that I just don't understand, expand your view of what you're looking at about Jesus, this emotion you don't understand. Expand your view and say, what do I know him to be like? Because what you know him to be like, you know God to be like. Because Jesus said, if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. And here Jesus demonstrates his humanity. And one day he's going to conquer death and the grave once and for all. For up to this point, though, it angers him. He has deep emotion. He's agitated. He's troubled by it because of what it does in the lives of those that he loved. So I don't think that this is because his friend has died or because of sorrow, or even the impact it had on his friends. I think this idea of the grave and its control over us moved him deeply, and it broke his heart. But that's just what I think. What do you think? What's your view of him? What is he like? How does he behave? Do you believe? I'm going to go through this last point. Why don't the band come up here right now and get ready? The last thing is this. The last thing that I think I could trust is I can trust his power. I can trust God's power. Jesus called with a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. I love how one guy put it. He said, I love that he said Lazarus, because if he would have just said come out, everybody would have came back from the dead. He had to specify, Lazarus, only you, come out. Resurrection power. Friends, resurrection is why there is Christianity to begin with. It's why it is. Without the resurrection, without a real bodily resurrection of Jesus, there is no Bible, there is no Christianity. Listen how one writer put it. Let me read you what he wrote. The resurrection and the life issued a command into the cavern of death. Somewhere in heaven, an angel heard the familiar voice of the shepherd and smiled. Somewhere in hell, a fallen angel mumbled, oh no. Lazarus, come out. The sound of the voice of God echoed off the grotto walls until the words found their way into a corner of paradise where sat a healthy, happy Lazarus in a corner cafe, sipping a latte with Moses, hearing firsthand the account of the Exodus. Lazarus! He heard his name and he looked at Moses. The patriarch shrugged his shoulders. You have to go, friend. Lazarus didn't want to go back to earth. Of that, I'm certain. But when Jesus commands, his disciples obey. Of that, Lazarus was certain. So his spirit descended from the heavens down to the skies until it reached the Bethany burial garden. He re-entered, reanimated his body, and stood up and lumbered toward the mouth of the tomb. John 11, the dead man came out, His hands and feet were wrapped in strips of linen and cloth around his face. Jesus said to them, "Take the grave clothes off and let him go." Friends, do you believe? Do you believe? Get the table.